certainly, and then Ginny Romney of IBM, both of whom absolutely passionate. We're going to hear them on Tuesday with the rest of the co-chairs share their vision about a fractured world and what we're going to do about it. But in addition, we have almost 1,900 other business leaders globally, about a third of them from each Europe, North America, and the rest of the world. Many, many CEOs and C-suite executives, but not just from the global companies, from the startup and the technology enabling community, as well as some of our own global leaders. And so we're very, very excited about these leaders coming together. And as Professor Schwab said, coming to one of the biggest, largest workshops that they could possibly imagine to engage at the most senior levels in these conversations. And so let me close with the two examples of some things that I also think are thought-provoking as we think about moving things forward. Just very recently, we launched another one of our health efforts on value-based healthcare. In partnership with the City of Atlanta, 40 organizations came together for a 5-year pilot on cardiac heart failure, with a goal of having, in 10 years, 30,000 lives saved because we're focused on the patient and not just on the treatment. If we can have that type of effort, and in Davos we'll be having a conversation about how do we roll this out further in things like diabetes with Canada, how do we move this in coronary heart disease with Singapore, and in other discussions with countries like the Netherlands. And so continuing to move these impactful multi-stakeholder efforts forward in ways that re-envision how and why we think about healthcare. And last but not least, I think our efforts in promoting global financial inclusion, while we've had this effort for multiple years, I think we're seeing very significant traction, looking at how and why these technologies of the fourth industrial revolution enable us to think about digital enablement of financial inclusion. But it's not just the finance companies coming together. It's finance companies and the telecoms companies and consumer companies with the governments and the NGOs and academics in order to have a multi-stakeholder dialogue about what has to be advanced. This past year, we saw great traction, again in Colombia, with actually legislative action in these areas, and some really interesting pilots in Mexico. And as we come through and into 2018, through Davos and into 2018, looking at East Africa, where we move in work in Rwanda, to Tanzania and Kenya with their central banks. So again, this business-driven, multi-stakeholder engagement in order to really impact people's lives and truly make a difference. And so I could clearly go on. I clearly have no enthusiasm about this subject, but I will happily turn over to my colleague Sadia to talk a little bit more about some areas equally of interest to business on skills and technology and economic growth. So Adrian, thank you.
Thank you. And Sadia, that's your cue. I know you engage with civil society, and also tell us a little bit more about the social issues, which are a big part of the Davos agenda this year.
Professor Schwab referred to the recovery since the financial crisis and also pointed to a social crisis that is starting to unfold. Any growth, for it to be meaningful, has to be inclusive. Next week, we'll be launching our Inclusive Development Index that points to how countries are performing on inclusion, on intergenerational equity, and on sustainability. Unsurprisingly, we find that while growth is recovering, there are still major challenges when it comes to equity and inclusion across both rich economies and poor economies. So what are we trying to do to help solve that problem? And this is something that we're not doing just at Davos, but really working year-round, and Davos becomes one moment in which some of these stakeholders are able to come together. Let me give you 3 examples. One, we will be producing next week for public view job transition maps. So a truck driver who is being displaced in their current role, what are the opportunities for that person to reskill and move towards a new job? What are the opportunities for an administrative assistant? What are the opportunities for a customer service worker? This will be laid out in this large big data exercise we've been doing over the last few months. Second, how do we translate that knowledge into real, tangible action? That is where we're working with coalitions of businesses, as Cheryl mentioned, to try to do some of that reskilling and upskilling that's required in the workforce so that people are ready for those new opportunities. We'll be announcing that a coalition of just 25 companies at this stage are making an announcement to reskill 10 million people by 2020, 2 million of which has already been achieved, and we'll be sharing more on that next week. And one core industry as a part of that is the IT industry, which has put together a portal with their digital skills and trainings, which is aiming for reskilling 1 million people as a part of that 10 million group that will be targeted. The third example relates to diversity and gender equality. I think we all know that some of these opportunities for fulfilling your potential are often missing for women due to outdated norms and structures. We're working in a public-private collaboration exercise with the Inter-American Development Bank in 3 countries in Latin America already, and we'll be announcing a 4th and announcing up to 10 by the end of 2018 to accelerate gender equality, particularly in the context of the 4th Industrial Revolution and the new opportunities it's offering. Finally, none of these efforts could move forward without the engagement of civil society, without the unions that represent the world's workers, the NGOs that support and provide relief to some of the most disadvantaged communities in the world, the social entrepreneurs that provide new opportunities to many communities around the world, and the religious leaders that represent the different identities and values of people in different communities around the world. We're very pleased that 140 civil society leaders will be joining us, including 2 of the co-chairs, Sharon Burrow, representing the world's workers, and Chetna Sinha, who is representing women entrepreneurs. Thanks.
Sadia, thank you very much. And lastly, I'm going to turn to Dominic Warre, who heads our public-private partnerships. We are the Organisation for Public-Private Collaboration. So Dominic, can you just tell us a little bit more about some of those highlights from the annual meeting programme?
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. And you've heard already from our panel a number of excellent examples of where the public and private and civil society have come together and really tackled some systemic challenges. It's surprising and interesting across the course of the year how many of these events and activities and workshops and get-togethers that we do really create kind of interesting and important outcomes. A couple more from the spring. We were delighted to help a number of governments and businesses launch a $400 million fund to kickstart investment for deforestation-free agriculture. We're working with an alliance of governments who represent 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions to accelerate clean energy innovation across their economies, building on some of the comments that Cheryl shared with you about the substantive interaction between business and government on some of these tricky issues. But above and beyond that, these platforms for shaping the future that Professor Schwab set out, for instilling that sense of cooperation in the world that we live in. We had a very, very interesting and exciting year on these matters. We inaugurated our Center for the 4th Industrial Revolution in San Francisco with its remit to maximize the benefits of science and technology for society. We're delighted that there are now 8 projects up and running at that center involving governments and business and experts to really kind of figure out what are the safeguards that we need in global society to maximize the opportunities of things like artificial intelligence, things like precision medicine, and many other matters besides. We also had a very important development, which Professor Schwab mentioned to you, in September at the time of the General Assembly of the United Nations. That was the first Sustainable Development Impact Summit. You've heard of these global goals of the UN, and you've heard of the need for cooperation across the public and private. How to bring people together to accelerate and scale that delivery. That's exactly what 2 days of discussion with 700 participants, including civil society, NGO leaders, business people, and heads of these international organizations worked on. There were some very, very interesting results. An $850 million fund supported by Denmark and other countries to invest in the global goals. A new alliance, the Global Battery Alliance, to bring together industry and other actors to deal with child labor, to deal with pollution, to deal with innovation, and to create clean energy solutions in this growing market of batteries we'll need to power the 4th Industrial Revolution. So a lot has been going on, and in fact that makes the annual meeting 2018, as you've heard, a very, very exciting milestone for us, particularly for these 14 system initiatives which have been mentioned, these platforms for cooperation between the public and private. Some highlights from the week ahead of us. There are so many that it's impossible to draw everything to your attention, and your paperwork and the website will have more. But there are three which I think are very exciting to us. We're going to be launching our new Global Centre for Cybersecurity, focused on capacity building, policy development and scenario planning to help protect us all from the risks of cyber attack. Pensions. We've all got a pension in the room. You'll have noticed during the year, I am sure, that we had a very, very interesting piece of work that detected a pension time bomb. The largest pension funds in the world are facing people who are living longer and saving less. If we don't act, there will be a $400 trillion gap between what is needed and what people will look for their pensions by 2050. That's 5 times the size of the world economy. So bringing together right now leaders from the financial system, from those involved in pensions and institutional investors and governments to figure out what to do before this problem strikes. And then moving into other areas, we're delighted to look forward to launching a major new action agenda on oceans. You've all have seen, I'm sure many of you reported on, the challenge of plastic pollution in the oceans, of overfishing, of ocean acidification, bringing together the leaders in this space, leading scientists, international organizations and businesses. And it was in 2016, Adrian, as I'm sure you'll remember, that we at the Forum with some of our partners put the first report out identifying the issue of plastic pollution in the ocean. And since then, this agenda has just taken off. So we're very excited to turn analysis into action. Finally, I'd say that across this theme that you've heard from the panel of bringing together the public and the private, of blending the finance, the innovation, the entrepreneurialism, and the desire to change, to make things better, to shape our future agenda, will form a very strong narrative through many of these system initiative themes of food, of energy, of mobility, of the future of production systems, the future of our consumption systems. And we even have, in collaboration with the OECD, a Sustainable Development Investment Partnership, which was launched in 2015. And its goal, with 60 projects already in its pipeline, its goal is to mobilize $100 billion of investment in infrastructure for the global goals by 2020. So we have a lot that's happened over the year. We've got a very exciting week ahead of us, and I have to say that there's a lot of work of public-private cooperation ahead of us into 2018. Thank you.
Dominic, and to all my colleagues, big thank you. I hope that's given you a comprehensive look at all of the many topics and participants that we'll be seeing in Davos next week. We have around 15 minutes left for questions. If I could just get a sense in the room of who might have a question, just put your hand up if you could for me, and I can then see where we need to direct our microphone. If with your question you could also tell us your name and your news organization, that would be fantastic. If we start in the far corner with that gentleman and the gentleman there, that would be fantastic. No, we just need a little bit of volume on your microphone. And we're going to get you another one, almost instantaneously. There we go.
Thank you very much. Tom Miles from Reuters News Agency. Globalization has made the financial elite who donate to politicians very, very wealthy. But it's left millions of our workers with nothing but poverty and heartache. So said Donald Trump in 2016. So what makes you think that bringing Trump to Davos, which is surely the home of globalization, if nothing else, is going to get him to buy into the Davos doctrine? Do you think you're going to be able to get him to play the team game that you like to play? Thanks very much.
Thanks, Tom, for that question. And certainly you'll see by our logo that we're committed to improving the state of the world rather than to advancing the interests of globalization. And if you recall over the years, our chairman's editorials, in particularly in the 1990s, on exactly this issue, when Klaus warned fulsomely of the dangers of unbridled globalization. I think you'll find it's a theme that's frequently been taken up in Davos. But I'll turn perhaps to Borge to just address the idea of President Trump's participation?
So I second what you just said, Adrian, and also as Professor Schwab said that his opening remarks here, very important for us is also to address this with quality easing and also with equitable globalization. This is for us very important that growth needs to be inclusive, it needs to create jobs, and it needs to be sustainable. And I think participants are really looking forward to also hear the leader of the largest economy in the world, President Trump, share his vision for the global economy moving forward. But I think what all we have presented here today shows that we really care about the growth being more inclusive, about skills, about equal opportunities, and we will not be able to address these issues in an effective way without having all stakeholders with us. That means also business, governments, and civil society.
Morgan, thank you. Gentlemen, just the middle.
Thank you. Nie Xiaoyang from China's Xinhua News Agency. My question is to Mr. Professor Schwab. Professor Schwab, you just mentioned the historical speech by Chinese President Xi Jinping last year in Davos, and you also have traveled a lot to China. And I believe you probably know China much better than most of the people in the Western world. So my question is, what do you expect from China to contribute to create a shared future, especially to change and improve this you called fractured world? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. It's a very good point, and it is true perhaps that I think Professor Schwab's first visit to China was in 1979 at the invitation of Deng Xiaoping. Can I just get the microphone to Professor Schwab?
No, I think it's next year that we celebrate the 40th time that a Chinese delegation will join us, a high-level governmental delegation will join us in Davos. So we have accompanied China from the beginning of its opening up and reform policies. We had the very important, many people would say historical speech of President Xi. I don't want to repeat what he said. I think we are very fortunate to have His Excellency Mr. Liu He with us. We know about his crucial role in shaping the economic policy of China, and we expect that he, at a very important moment, because it's after the Party Congress, will explain to you the next phase of Chinese economic policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know we've got more questions in the middle and just there, so can we get a microphone, the lady there and the gentleman there?
Claudia Kneem, Swiss Press Agency. Question to Mr. Schwab. We all know that Donald Trump is going to dominate the topic, and we all know about him. So I wonder, what is your hope? What the spirit of Davos should do to Donald Trump?
That's a very good point. I just want to take the gentleman there as well. Thanks.
Yes, Jamil Shadem, a journalist from Brazil. My question also to Mr. Schwab. You're going to have for the first time in 4 years a president of Brazil. Mr. Temer will be speaking on the same date that President Lula will be judged in Brazil. So my question to you is, what do you expect to hear from Mr. Temer, and what do you expect from the reforms in Brazil? Thank you.
So I'm going to just turn to my colleague, Borge Brenda, to just perhaps take on those questions, because he's participated in the annual meeting not just as a member of the forum staff, but also as a foreign minister representing Norway. And you perhaps can talk a bit more about the spirit of Davos and what that really means from both dimensions, perhaps. And also, we have an extremely strong Latin American presence, as you mentioned, and part of that presence is President Temer. And perhaps just speak a little bit, given that we will also be in Sao Paulo this year with our Forum on Latin America.
I think the latter point is also very important. We will then have our first summit after Davos in Latin America, Sao Paulo, in March. We are expecting great participation from the whole of Latin America. And we see also that Brazilian economy is really, again, growing. I think President Temer will also share his views there on how to make that growth even more inclusive. For me, as a former foreign minister, I also had the pleasure of going to Davos as a participant. I, in many ways, feel it is the workshop that's already mentioned, but it's also in many ways the summit of summits beginning of the year, because you add on top of the government's business and civil society. And that's the only way to really deal with challenges moving forward. My view is that I think this also has triggered the great American participation this year. With 8 secretaries, 8 cabinet members of the US is coming to Davos and staying, most of them, for the whole week. Commerce, Treasury. We will also have Secretary Tillerson on Thursday, joining President Trump. And I think Davos always has a great impact on all of us when we go there, because it's unique, because one has all walks of life represented there.
Thank you very much. We have about 5 minutes left for questions. Can I just get a sense, lady at the back? And there's a couple of questions just on that side.
Thank you. Lisa Schlein, Voice of America. I was wondering, dealing with the bookend speakers, so to speak, you have Prime Minister Modi, who is representing the emerging world. He is opening the forum, and President Trump is ending the forum. What themes will they be dealing with? Can you give us a sneak preview of what they will be discussing, whether you expect that their viewpoints will be complementary, or whether they will have pretty divergent views of everyone's so-called fractured world? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I can just take the 2 questions just now.
Yes, thank you. Alain Franco, RTS Radio. We are all convinced that the spirit of Davos is very high and has a big impact on everybody. But did you get any commitment from President Trump that he will play the game and answer to this need you were talking about to struggle against this world and have more cooperation?
Thank you. And just a question, finally, your colleague next door.
Yes, thank you. Konrad Sterling from Blick, Switzerland. Obviously, the Swiss public is psyched about Mr. Trump's visit to Switzerland. Can you give us any more details on his trip? Well, you said that most of his cabinet members are going to stay for the whole week. When is he going to arrive, and when is he going to leave?
Well, I think we can start perhaps by sharing the time he'll be speaking on Friday, which is now been finalised, which is one point we can share, most definitely. I think in terms of sneak previews of speeches, it would be unfair to very notable speakers to take any thunder away from their moments on the podium. But we do expect speakers to embrace and recognise the theme of the meeting, which is obviously creating a shared future in a fractured world. But perhaps I can turn again to Borger and just get your sense on some of the details around President Trump's speech, and also just a reminder of the timing on Prime Minister Modi's opening.
So, of course, Modi and Trump are very important, and Modi is opening, and Trump is doing speaking at the closing or almost at the end of our annual meeting. But we should not forget that we have 70 head of states and governments there. we also on Wednesday have a really important European Day. We have the newly elected president of France, Macron, speaking. Gentiloni will also on Thursday have Secretary General Guterres with us also addressing. And you know, we have G7 presidency of this year with Trudeau, and G20 president, headed by Argentina and President Macri. So I think they will be complementary to each other, but each of these speakers and leaders, of course, will then have their own viewpoint and share their insight. And for participants, it's also very interesting to see, like we have seen before, how they position and which challenges they put most emphasis on. And the dialogue that's always there in Davos is also crucial. So we are very well prepared for this. I think the planning now is for President Trump to speak at 2 o'clock on Friday. I think for Prime Minister Modi, I believe it's 11 o'clock on Tuesday. I'm looking here at my colleague Lee Howell in the front, so I don't make any mistakes on the timing. So I think we're pretty good to go.
So for everyone who has registered onto the forum's application, you'll see that our program is being constantly updated. You'll see some new timings come in. I think we've shared with you one of the preliminary programming lists where you'll see all of the sessions that Emma was talking about. I hope you'll have gotten a sense from my colleagues here and from Professor Schwab just how rich and deep some of the conversations that we'll be having in Davos are, and just how important some of the topics to be tackled are. There'll be opportunities at the end just to have individual follow-ups with any of our panelists. In the meantime, thank you very much, and I hope you'll join us in wishing a successful 2018 meeting. So thank you.